Today, it's my pleasure to join with the Louisiana Policy Institute for Children, Greater New Orleans, Inc., the Louisiana Association of Business and Industry, and Ewing Timber Company to release the Policy Institute's two-pager, Getting Families Back to Work, Investments in Early Care and Education. Throughout today's program, we invite you to type questions into the chat box. At the end of the program, there will be a question and answer session when we will attempt to address all inquiries. But at this time, it's my honor to introduce Dr. Libby Sonier Neto, Executive Director of the Louisiana Policy Institute for Children.
Thank you, Jan. As an independent source of data, research, and pertinent information for policymakers, the Louisiana Policy Institute for Children works to shed light on the state of early care and education in Louisiana. While Louisiana recovers from the COVID-19 pandemic and prepares to reopen the economy at the end of the month, we know that any recovery plans must include early care and education. As a reminder, prior to COVID-19, 2/3 of children under age 5 and under in Louisiana had both parents or their single parent in the workforce. For those parents to return to work, they must have access to quality, reliable early care and education for their children. To ensure this access, critical investments will be necessary to restore the historical, underinvested early care and education industry impacted by COVID-19 and expand resources available to families experiencing financial losses as a result of the pandemic. Putting it frankly, without a robust early care and education sector, Louisiana will struggle to get back to work. To help us understand what it will take to support early care and education providers, the Louisiana Policy Institute for Children conducted a second survey of child care providers and updated cost modeling to reflect the true cost of care as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. The survey, conducted with our partners from April 13th through 20th, 2020, the fourth week of the stay-at-home order, provides more insights into troubling circumstances and difficult decisions continuing to face child care providers as the COVID-19 pandemic persists. The Louisiana Policy Institute for Children also modeled the true cost of providing early care and education during COVID-19. This updated cost model reflects the new realities and operating parameters facing early care and education providers as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, namely lower teacher-to-child ratios and group size requirements. The data from our longitudinal survey and updated cost model inform the findings and conclusions we are going to share with you all today, which speaks to the state of early care and education in Louisiana and the essential investments necessary to truly get families back to work as we reopen our economy.
Thank you, Libby. At this time, I'd like to introduce Michael Heck, President and CEO of Greater New Orleans, Inc. Thank you for joining us, Michael.
Thank you, Jan, and thank you, Libby. It's great to be virtually with everybody here today. As the Economic Development Organization for the GNO region, the Greater New Orleans region, the epicenter of economic productivity and tax revenue for the state of Louisiana, it's incumbent upon us to build a path towards recovery and a future that's prosperous for everybody. GNO Inc. recently produced a plan, Getting Back to Work in the New Normal, that talks about how we can get open again in a responsible and safety-first way. We think this is so important for people, both practically and financially, but also psychologically. As we implement this plan, we're keeping early child care at the forefront of our minds due to the key role in getting our region back to work. After all, it's early care and education that is essential to reopening the economy on two reasons, on two fronts. First of all, obviously for the education of our children. And by the way, the achievement gap is only going to get greater the longer the kids are out of school, but also, frankly, just allowing parents to get back to work, dealing with the child care aspect of it. The Policy Institute's Getting Families Back to Work two-pager illustrates exactly how critical child care providers have been during the pandemic so far. Now, while some child care providers have been able to remain open, those that have reported staying open to support the families of essential workers. The child care providers are supporting our essential workers and our frontline healthcare workers. Second, 98% of open providers during the latest survey period serve children of essential workers, supporting the working parents and employers, keeping Louisiana citizens healthy and the economy moving during the pandemic. So As we open the rest of the economy beyond essential workers and more parents are called from their homes to return to work, we need for early care and education among working families. That need is only going to increase. Prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, the state was only serving 15% of children ages 3 or under who are eligible for assistance. Now, with literally hundreds of thousands of Louisianians filing for unemployment benefits, the need for programs like child care assistance will be greater than ever. Let me conclude, Jan and Libby and everybody, by saying this. We think that the need for early child care is so essential that we are highlighting it up front as one of the keys to reopening the economy. It's not something to do later. We need it now for the good of our children, but also for the good of our employees and workers. Thank you for including me in GNO Inc.
Thank you, Michael, very much. Now it is my pleasure to welcome Louisiana Association of Business and Industry Senior Vice President Camille Conaway. Thank you for taking the time to be here with us today, Camille.
Thank you, Jan, and thank you to the Policy Institute for your work on this important issue. I would echo Michael's comments that this is really important, not just for our children, but for our workforce and to get our economy going again during this really unprecedented time. The Louisiana Association of Business and Industry is the state's largest business association. We are the state chamber of commerce and the state manufacturing association. We represent 2,000 companies across the state. That's everything from family-owned restaurants and retail all the way to multinational corporations. We have seen firsthand how COVID-19 is impacting businesses of all states, of all sizes, from a statewide multi-industry perspective. We conducted a series in the last few weeks of industry focus groups where several factors rose to the top as really foundational issues that we'll have to address prior to reopening the economy. That included things like assistance in procuring PPE when it's required, limitations on employer liability when they're following all governmental guidance and laws, and it also included available, affordable child care. And that includes not both early childhood education, but also for our school-age children, summer camps on a limited basis, earlier school reopenings. We're going to have to consider an array of options to be able to get this economy going, and early childhood is critical component. At LABI, we actually released a series of recommendations from early childhood all the way through adult workforce training a few weeks ago, that are available on our website, and it echoed a lot of the work that the Policy Institute is highlighting today. So I'm very pleased to be here. We all know that child care providers are also small businesses. And during the pandemic, we've seen a significant number of child care providers having to close temporarily, largely for COVID-19 related reasons. Knowing how critical this industry is to our recovery efforts, it's really important that closed centers receive the support they need to reopen and serve parents returning to work. Even before COVID-19, early care and education providers operated on precariously thin profit margins, leaving them especially vulnerable in economic downturns. So it's not surprising that over a third of all providers, open or closed, that responded to the latest survey expect an extended closure due to the pandemic that threatens their permanent closure, like many of our small businesses now. To ensure sufficient care is available to families while their parents return to work, we must help the 70% of providers who reported their closure to the Louisiana Department of Education as of the end of April. We must help them reopen their doors. As of the latest survey, early care and education providers that have closed estimated needing almost $23,000 per center on average just to reopen, which totals over $26 million statewide. Child care providers will need our support now more than ever. The findings of the survey further our strong belief at LABI that a robust education system is crucial to equip Louisianians to compete in the marketplace, to support their families, to support their households. Thank you all for the chance to weigh in today.
Thank you so much, Camille. Next, I am pleased to introduce Randy Ewing. Randy Ewing is the former Louisiana State Senate President and a current member of the Louisiana Board of Regents. Welcome, Randy.
Thank you, Jan, and good morning to everyone. It is an honor to be a part of the continuing effort to provide quality child daycare for all children. I'd like to also point out that Melanie Bronfman is to be strongly commended for bringing this need to the forefront, both socially, politically, and business. And thank you, Jan, and your staff for continuing to carry on this vital work. My professional background is small business. And like most small businesses, I understand that the success depends on two things: worthy mission to serve a need, and certainly good employees to serve that mission. But employees must have the comfort that their young children are being cared for in a safe, quality environment provided by approved professional daycare providers. And that has been our mission. This has always been true, but it takes on an even greater importance as we anticipate the reopening and the restart of our economy. Here's the hitch. It costs money, lots of money. In fact, quality care for young children all day long rivals the cost of college tuition. This makes quality care for many families out of reach. We have all lost ground during this episode of a pandemic, and the challenge to restart our economy is going to be great. The Policy Institute's program, Getting Families Back to Work, shows that there will be a dire and additional need of investment for quality care for children of workers, and to provide money and support for those who provide the care for our children. Affordability was a problem before, but COVID-19 and the precautions that we will now have to take to protect our children will make the problem even greater. Last year, encouraged by the Policy Institute and others, Governor Edwards and the legislature recognized the important link between business and good quality child care, and they began funding the Child Care Assistance Program. This provided a voucher that gave parents the support that they needed to enter their children in good quality care, and also supported those approved professional child care centers. Our purpose here today is to encourage continued and increased funding for this essential program and the service of the providers. The best interest of our society and the economy has always been, and certainly going forward, is served by taking care of all our children. The message today is business is not and cannot be run without good employees. And employees with young children cannot work without good quality care. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ewing. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Libby for some more remarks.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you, Mr. Ewing and Michael, as well as Camille. We can't thank you enough for helping to share these findings. These troubling facts point clearly to early care and education playing an essential role in supporting employees' return to work and the Louisiana economy fully reopening. This is why the Policy Institute is recommending Louisiana make the following investments given the current availability of federal funds. $26 million from one-time COVID-19 related federal funding to support the reopening of early care and education providers. $20 million for one-time COVID-19 related federal funding to enable early care and education providers to operate within a smaller size requirements while keeping tuition within reach for working families. And $25 million in state funding for early care and education assistance in the fiscal year 2020-2021 budget to increase access for 4,000 children on an ongoing basis that we know will be needed. As the economy reopens, we will continue to keep a diligent eye on the state of early care and education in Louisiana. We are hopeful that investments like the ones we have recommended above will put the state on the right path to recovery. There are many unknowns still ahead, but one thing is known. Without increased investment in early care and education, parents and caregivers working in every industry will not be able to return to work to provide for their families and keep the economy moving forward.
Thank you so much, Libby, and thank you to all of our presenters today for participating in this important conversation. Please note that there will be a third and final iteration of this survey conducted by the
She must have muted him. That's not us, that's them.
At this time, we are going to proceed with the question and answer portion of the event. Please type any questions you have on findings from today's report into the chat box. And I'm going to look at what is in the chat box. This is a question. I understand how important it is for early child care centers open. The problem I am running into regarding opening is the lack of monetary support from the Louisiana Department of Education and the state itself. That is, unless you are a type 3 center. Type 3 centers have continued to receive CCAP payments, even if they are closed for every child that is on CCAP, and have also received 3 grants thus far, and they are working on a 4th. Type 2 centers like myself have not received any assistance from our regulating agencies. The only advice I've received is to become a type 3 center, which does not benefit me because of the area my center is located in. How are we type 2 centers supposed to open without support and actually feel as though we are less important than centers that are type 3? My center is very high quality and has a perfect inspection record and an excellent reputation. Who will be available to help us reopen? Anybody want to take that?
I'll take it. This is Libby. We will certainly share your concerns with the Louisiana Department of Ed. We've heard this concern prior about centers that are not type 3 centers that are part of the quality improvement rating system. And I know that this is a huge concern for centers outside of that system. And so we'll make sure that we share that information with the Department of Education on your behalf.
We have another question. Do you have any information on incentives for teachers to return to work?
I really wish we did. I think all of our panelists and as well as us at the Louisiana Policy Institute for Children are having the continuing conversations about incentives that could help teachers get back to work. Because what we know right now is that many of our early care and education teachers are actually making more on unemployment. And so it's a real concern about how to get the workforce back to work to be able to serve children.
Thank you. Another question, is there any guidance for how to safely open early childhood centers? How do small children practice social distancing, et cetera? Even with a smaller census, how do young children practice safety?
So I will say this as a child development specialist and an infant toddler specialist. I don't know how you do that, but I do know that our Department of Ed and our Department of Health are working closely to really try to put some procedures in place that can help support everybody being healthy and also being safe in this new world of COVID-19 pandemic.
Another question, and I'm going to paraphrase. Do you think that there should be raises for teachers and providers, or do you see a raise?
I would say I think that we all would agree that we would love for childcare teachers to be able to make more money, and it's something that we all support. I don't know how that's going to happen, and that's part of the ongoing conversation about how do we get teachers back to work right now.
Another question here. Are there any findings in this second survey that surprised you or differed dramatically from the first survey?
I think it was just what we found this time is it just reconfirmed what we found in the first survey. I think the surprise that we saw is the increased loss of revenue for childcare during this time. So from, when we did our first survey, March 16th through the 23rd, to this survey, April 13th, the number that we have been able to approximate is it's cost over $30 million of loss of revenue by childcare in the state. that's staggering. And so how do you make up for that? How do you recoup that cost? And so that's really part of the conversations that we're having with LABI and with, the Budget Project and with Greater New Orleans Inc. and Committee of 100 and others around the state of how do we recover from this, and how do we make sure that children and their families will have a safe place to go to care and educate from children. We mentioned this earlier, but what we know from longitudinal research is this: for children that went through the Great Depression, Hurricane Katrina, and the Great Recession in 2008, we know that they typically, because of the economic downturn, we know that children's development typically suffers. And so we really think that it's imperative not only to get families back to work, which is critical. We need families to get back to work so they can provide for their children, so children's development can get back on track as well.
Thank you, Libby. From Camille Conaway at LABI, we got a reminder in the chat box that there is more information on safety for reopening child care centers on the Department of Education website, and there's a link in there for anybody who's interested.
Hey, Jan.
And yes.
Who wants to reply to the loss of revenue piece as well?
Okay.
Yeah, thank y'all. I just wanted to echo your comments, Libby. If anything, that did not surprise me. As we look to industries across the state, especially small businesses that have been closed, you're looking at massive revenue shortfalls. And the issue you mentioned as well about unemployment and the relatively high unemployment benefit is an inhibiting factor in having some folks return to work. So I think that these are issues where you're really seeing the childcare industry, like many other small businesses, in very similar situation. I think the childcare industry is uniquely situated because we have to have you guys up and running to have the rest of the industries up and running. And so part of our conversations are also with our federal officials as we look to an additional stimulus package coming in the weeks ahead. We need to be emphasizing this foundational point about supporting providers as unique small businesses as they consider different forms of aid. We need aid across the board for small businesses to get back to work, but this industry in particular needs to be at the top of that list in our opinion.
Yeah, thank you, Camille. That's a very important point. Another question, can someone talk about the ratio again? Is it still 9-to-1? Technical question. Easy answer, yes. Another question, will the Louisiana Policy Institute for Children cost model be adjusted to reflect true cost in phase 2 of child care restart, which is scheduled to begin on June the 8th?
We will. So we'll continue to cost model out how we can so that people can really understand the true cost of care. It's something that we talked about prior to COVID-19, but we talk about it even more now because reduced ratios cost centers more money. We have a colleague with a center with a population that can serve about 200 kids. Because of the reduced ratios, she'll have to go down to under 100 children to serve. And so when you think about paying fixed cost and those types of things, it's really hard to think about how do you afford to provide the care as well.
Great question. Another one, just a very practical question. How can we get supplies we need for reopening? The stores are sold out of everything.
I know that the Louisiana Department of Education is working hard to procure materials that child care centers need so that you're not going to have to go out and bid against other companies or hospitals. And so I'm being told that that is happening at the state level.
A comment that said, where the ratios 9-to-1 raises are not on the table, centers are trying to keep the door open. And then a question about the unemployment and then the federal pandemic unemployment. If teachers do not want to go to work, can they be cut from unemployment since their work is available for them?
Do you want me to answer that?
Please.
Yes.
Yeah, there is so two things. One is that I think there's a lot of understanding that if unemployment is extended past July 31st, it needs to be done in a way that doesn't create a disincentive for people to return to work across all industries and create this terrible dynamic between employers and employees and this Solomon's choice. That said, there is actually a technical process. I think it's called a Form 77, whereby if you do offer somebody to return to work at their job and they refuse, the employer can turn that in along with the offer of employment to the Employment Commission, the Workforce Commission, and that person can be denied benefits. But of course, there are a lot of costs to doing that to the relationship between the employer and the employee. So I think most would prefer not to do that.
A comment, centers that stayed open have taken a big hit as well, lots of money from the ratio drop. And then a question for the business representatives on this call. From the parent perspective, is there a task force or collaborative coming up with messaging for employers regarding employees as parents navigating the on-again, off-again nature of school and childcare?
I'll take that first. Is that two things. One is that if people look at our Getting Back to Work document, again, we highlight childcare as being essential for this purpose. That being said, in our own internal guidance documents and in our Back to Work document, we also counsel flexibility and recognize that all of us are going to need to be extremely flexible to accommodate changes in personal circumstance, changes in the course of the pandemic. And so, yeah, the guide word is flexibility for everybody, without question. And that's, I think, very commonly understood.
I would agree with that, Michael. I think, you know, even our larger companies have found for their professional staff, remote work has worked well. And I think they're open to more flexibility where it makes sense. I've not heard a strong push to get everyone back to work on day one. I think that that relationship, employer to employee, is critically important right now. But I agree with Michael. It's broadly understood that that flexibility is going to be part of the new normal for a while now. And we do continue to push out any information we can to our employers that we get from folks like the Policy Institute or from the Department of Education.
Thank you, Camille. The next question is probably up my alley. I don't know if we all agree, but it says, I think an additional inhibiting factor to workers coming back to work is the low minimum wage in this state. Is it a structural long-term problem aggravated by this pandemic and fraught situation? The minimum wage is probably a subject for a separate seminar, but I would love to hear what others think. Well, certainly at the Budget Project, the minimum wage is too low and needs to be raised.
Can I address that in one way that it was expressed to me, Jan?
Sure.
You know, so the minimum wage discussion is a very rich discussion that we need to have. Let me address it from a different angle, though, very quickly. I think that one thing that people miss when they criticize or critique the hospitality industry and restaurants and hotels for the low wages is that is a structural issue in the entire industry. And that I think the constructive answer for our state and region is to create more better paying, diverse jobs that are alternatives to that or that create ladders. And so just two comments there. One is we're looking at retraining opportunities for hospitality workers to move them from hospitality into customer service and business processing, outsourcing jobs, professional jobs. And we already have examples of that, like the Ernst & Young Executive Assistance Center in downtown New Orleans. The second, in terms of framing it going forward, I think was so nicely said by Walt Leger, the #2 person at New Orleans and Company. He said that his vision for the future is that 10 years from now, the hospitality industry in New Orleans is even bigger than it is today, yet it's only the 5th or 6th overall biggest industry. And I think that's a nice way of describing how we can have a win-win.
And thank you for that. And I would just say that you know, Louisiana is one of the 5 states in the country without a minimum wage law at all on the books. And certainly we would love to move people up a career ladder, but there are still going to be people doing the retail jobs and doing the jobs that sort of the low end of the economy, and those jobs still need to be able to allow somebody to pay rent and put on the table and be self-sufficient, and $7.25 an hour simply doesn't provide that. But again, probably for another day, Next comment, a reminder that the Head Start programs have funding and have been serving children at home and may be offering a summer school program for children going for kindergarten. And then a question, what did Louisiana Department of Education base its decision on to restore ratios to pre-COVID-19 levels in phase 2?
I think they were looking at the phase 2 requirements, from what I understand, of number of people that you can have, have together at one time. Is my understanding.
Emails.
What you said, Jeff.
And then let's see, phase 1, group size for infants, 5 including adults, for all other 10 including adults. A private question to me, may I ask a question in person? I don't have the ability to unmute anybody, so I think that's a no, unfortunately. Next question regarding Form 77 and potential to be denied unemployment. Are people's individual needs taken into account? For example, if employee is older, immune compromised, caregiver of elders, etc.
I can take that one. Yeah, the expanded unemployment benefits have a whole different level of criteria, and it does include items like that. The Form 77 is typically used for employers who are making an offer of work to an employee who is available and able to go back to work. In this case, it sounds like that person would qualify to remain on unemployment despite a letter offering them their job back. But Michael, you may have a different read on that. But in theory, that should be taken into account.
I agree.
Hello, this is Randy. I would like to comment on a couple of things. One, on the low income level, I do know there is an all-out effort being made in higher education through our community colleges and through our universities to try to increase the skill level of our workforce. By doing this, we will provide better opportunities for better jobs. There will always be some jobs in the service industry probably that do not require or do not gain the highest employment salaries. But I do think looking at going forward and the restart, we're going to see a whole new paradigm in higher education, and we're going to see a greater focus on preparing young people for the jobs that will be available in IA, robotics, and other things that sweep this country. And I do think that those things are being promoted and pushed by a lot of people across the United States, and certainly being promoted and pushed by the Board of Regents and all of those involved in higher education. I would also like to comment on the summer reading programs. I am a firm believer that one of the things that we could do that would really improve the quality of life for children and their prospect of success would be to go to year-round school, to have summer school, summer camps, engage these children in meaningful, productive pursuit of reading, having fun. We have, as a family, we have sponsored some summer reading programs with innovative teachers and using high-tech smart boards and things like that, having meals, bringing them to school, and the success has been remarkable as they progress just in 6 weeks. So I think that one thing that we should consider is taking care of our children through year-round education. Now, this does not include the children that are 1, 2, or 3 years old. We're still talking about a different thing, but the question came up about summer programs and about year-round school, and I would just like to make that comment.
I agree 1,000%.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Ewing. And those of us with young kids are facing the end of school and a whole new set of challenges coming up in the next couple of months. The next question is another practical one. What if I will be able to bring back only half of my workers due to the ratio? Can I do that?
Yes, I don't see any reason why you cannot. The challenge will be if you took the Paycheck Protection loan, and that would be something that you would have to think carefully about. And we are hoping to get some of that guidance changed as well to extend the time period and potentially the amount of payroll. But outside of the PPP loan requirements, I don't see any reason why you would be limited in, determining how best to reopen and with how many of your employees.
Thank you. Next question. With COVID-19 cases going up in states that have already opened, we see some governors are closing certain areas again. How will this affect Louisiana with the plans to reopen and lift the stay-at-home order on May 15th?
I can just say that I know that they're going to be tracking our numbers very carefully, and that there are contingency plans in place if we do start backsliding to very quickly reflatten the curve. So I just know that everybody's kind of moving forward, hoping for the best, but prepared for there being challenges. That's at every level, local, state, federal.
Great. We've got a lot of questions in the queue now. I tried to get my staff back once I received my PPP. 2 told me no. I called the unemployment office and was told there was nothing I could do about that. 1 would not let me pay her vacation. What do I do with that?
I would just say it sounds like you did the right thing. Document your letter of offer. Put it in writing. That's really all you can do. If someone doesn't come back to work, there's certainly nothing you can do, to compel them.
Next, a comment. Counseling on flexibility sounds great. Hope there is an effort to extend that message broadly, especially to employers of low-wage hourly employees. Next question. Will the amounts of money you're recommending in this report be sufficient to see the state through recovery?
No, it will take more than that, but we think that this will give us a jump start to start things moving. What we know is the state's worked really hard looking at the federal dollars that we've received from the CARES Act related to the Child Care Development Block and how to use that and be flexible with those funds. But it's going to cost more than we can imagine, but we've got to start. We also know there will be more need for childcare assistance throughout the state as people return back to work, because people are not going to be making what they used to make and will be able to qualify. And so we really think it's important, not just as the Louisiana Policy Institute for Children, but the coalition that we have, as well as Ready Louisiana with over 90 organizations. All of our panelists are a part of it. We know that the need is going to be great. And so that $25 million that we're asking from the state really is imperative. We're going to have a huge need for childcare, and we need to be able to meet it to get our economy back up.
Yeah, thank you, Libby. And I would just add, we saw the first official revenue forecast post-COVID on Monday, where revenues for next year are about $1 billion less than the economists were predicting back in January. And that is going to have a big effect on the budget. We have not yet seen the recommendations from the governor or the legislature, how they want to implement that. But everybody who gets discretionary dollars in the state budget, and there's very little discretionary money in the budget that the legislature actually controls, it's going to be tight purse strings for a lot of folks. Higher education, healthcare, a lot of programs that get general fund dollars are going to be competing for resources that are now more scarce than they were. So it's going to be very difficult, but extremely necessary. Here's a question or a comment. I've stayed open through COVID-19 and taken in needed workers, children, and I am having to turn away some of my regular enrollment that is trying to come back due to the ratio. Will the ratio increase soon?
It won't be able to increase until we get to phase 2. And so in my understanding, and you all are panelists, correct me if I'm wrong, but I've heard from public health officials that we can't go into phase 2 any sooner than 21 days.
Right.
And so if for chance we were to spike up in our numbers as with COVID cases, then that may delay phase 2. And so I think we're all trying to figure that out, especially in this sector where you know that you don't want to turn away children that you've been serving over a long period of time because you're now serving for essential workers and healthcare providers. It's just a real dilemma.
Thank you. Another great question here. Will there be hazard pay for child care employees considering the fact that we will be working with children who will have a higher risk of exposure due to parents returning to work and the economy reopening?
We haven't heard anything thus far related to that.
Okay, a comment, the ratios will increase in phase 3 if the state meets the criteria to move to the phase. Now we have 34 messages here. I'm scrolling through them in order, and I've been told we have a hard stop at noon. So if I don't get to everybody, I apologize. Question, has there been any progress with Louisiana Department of Education and or the governor's office in Louisiana helping to shoulder the COVID-19 liability burden with child care providers?
Camille?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that one, Jan?
Sure. Has there been any progress with Louisiana Department of Education and or the governor's office in Louisiana helping to shoulder the COVID-19 liability burden with child care? I know that liability has been a big issue.
It is. It's a huge issue for every industry sector. Obviously, people are very concerned that even if they're following all the guidance, all the laws, all the rules, that they could be open to a lawsuit by an employee or by a client or customer. There are several bills moving through the legislative process that would provide limited liability, raise that standard to gross negligence. So if you are an employer or a child care provider who is following all of the guidance that is being requested by the state and federal government, then the standard for a lawsuit against you would be significantly higher than it otherwise would be. You would have to exhibit willful misconduct or gross negligence. So I would urge y'all to support those bills as they move through the process. They're going to be critically important for a number of sectors of the economy to be comfortable reopening and not exposing themselves to even greater risk at this difficult time.
And if I could just add something to this, there are actually two sides to the need for safe harbor for businesses that follow regulations. One is from customers, which, you know, for a restaurant could be an adult, for childcare could be a child, as potential vectors, not just themselves getting sick, but getting a family member or a friend getting sick. So kind of knock on tort liability. And the second is, again, is obviously from the inside, from employees themselves. And again, if the appropriate protections are taken, then needing the standard to be raised from just negligence to gross negligence.
Okay, thank you. A comment, in Florida, seniors have the option to obtain their CDA, which I think means commercial driver. I don't know what that means.
Child
in high school.
Development Associates.
Okay, so this allows them to experience teaching. Some even decide to get a degree after obtaining this certification. Just a thought. From the Children's Cabinet, the vast majority of child care centers are open year-round. A comment, several other states, including New Mexico and Oregon, are helping child care providers with shouldering increased liability and risk due to COVID-19. What's Louisiana going to do? We've talked about that. If someone in my center tests positive for COVID, how does that affect my center? It's a great question.
It's a very good question. I think you'll have to lean into the Louisiana Department of Health's recommendations related to staying at home and quarantining yourself, and as well as the children that were exposed because of the caregiver.
Another question about this CNA, CDA, we'll move on. Question, regarding the dollars you had on the slide with some from COVID relief and $25 million from the state, is that a $25 million increase over what was in the budget last year? It
is. So what we're hoping to do is maintain the funding that we had in the 2019 legislature year for this 1920 fiscal year. This is a $25 million on top of that, because we know that we're going to have such a need to be able to serve children.
Right.
And it would allow us to serve 4,000 more children.
Okay. In the chat, there is a link to the Louisiana Department of Education Child Care Guidelines for Reopening. That was in their newsletter this week. That link is in the chat. I missed the first part of the webinar. Will it be available online?
Yes.
Libby.
Yes.
Are employees allowed to continue with unemployment if their hours are reduced?
Camille's nodding her head yes.
Yes, although Louisiana is not one of the states that have adopted a work share program. So I believe that only applies if your total weekly wages is below $247 a week, is my understanding. So there are provisions that Louisiana could do if they wanted to that allows work sharing for people who aren't above that threshold to have some of their wages covered by unemployment, and let more people keep working at reduced hours.
That is
but again,
that we've heard repeatedly from employers that they would like to be able to offer to avoid this situation we talked about earlier, where your two choices are either kick someone off their unemployment, or to force them back to work, or let them go. And so I think there may be some common ground here to try to figure out a longer term solution beyond the July unemployment for how we can get people back to work but ensure they're stable.
Yeah, I think that would be
Sorry, Jan.
Sorry, go ahead.
I apologize. I was distracted for a second. I just want to make sure this was said. So one is, there's a sense that whatever happens after July 31st has to remove disincentives for productivity while ensuring support. But the second is that individuals can actually get paid up to $297 a week in Louisiana and still qualify for the $600 of enhanced federal unemployment. So you can actually effectively make close to $900 a week in Louisiana while staying employed. That's a totally legitimate workaround to the problem in the near term.
Thank you, Michael. Comment from Cindy Bishop, Child Care Association of Louisiana. For most centers that have had a COVID positive person, they have closed the center for a week. Another question, I have parents complaining about scanning their children on the machine in the future. I know we are not scanning now, but this is being taken into consideration for later.
Okay.
Let's see. And then I think we're down to, hold on, let me see. Let me make sure. Okay, hold on a second. One question. On a scale from 1 to 10, 10 being the highest from each panelist, what's your read on whether Congress will agree to another stimulus round that includes $500 billion plus to states and cities? That's the $1 trillion question.
Over what period of time? There's a timing issue that's really so critical, is the real question.
There was no timing mentioned, but let's go with in calendar year 2020, but before the election.
I think it depends on whether this continues to expand and more people are affected and the economy is continued to be adversely affected. If the virus continues to grow, I think that will depend on whether they are able to do that. I think that Senator Cassidy has a good bill that is trying to help local government cover some of their losses and some of their costs so they can continue to provide the services that we are dependent on, whether it's fire or police protection or whatever. So we'll just have to see how it plays out. But there's no question that this is a work in progress insofar as what we do about combating this threat to all of us and certainly to our whole country.
I agree. I would give it a very high probability that additional aid is coming. Whether we hit that $500 billion threshold, I think is anyone's guess right now.
Yeah, I agree. But it can happen quickly because the HEROES Act is going nowhere as currently written. It's a negotiating instrument.
And what we're hearing from our national partners related to early care and education is a $50 billion ask in the next edition of support from the federal government.
Yeah, I agree. I don't see there's any way that they get out of this calendar year without another stimulus package, and I'm going to not just send more aid to individuals, but also to state and local governments. We saw a report by the auditor last week that there's almost $1 billion shortfall just in local governments that depend on sales tax, and so not only the state, but a lot of our towns and cities and parishes are going to have trouble paying for just basic services like police and fire protection, and that's going to filter up to Congress, and I think we'll get some relief. It's not going to look like what Nancy Pelosi presented yesterday, but probably more like what Senator Cassidy and Senator Menendez are working on. But it'll change as it goes through the process. I think I'm actually at the end of the questions here. We have a new one. In your opinion, do you think they will include extending the UI through December 2020? Camille, maybe?
Yeah, I think it'll be, I mean, it looks like it will be extended. Whether it's at the current level and for how long is still, to be determined. I have a feeling both the PPP and the UI are likely to be extended just based on the state of the economy as we go into the summer. I don't think we know how long or how much.
Okay. I have one more question here. With the recent revelation of young children appearing to be contracting a potentially deadly version of coronavirus, how might this impact childcare restarts?
I think it'll really go back to health and safety standards to make sure that children and families are taking precautions, but also that our childcare industry is taking precautions. Again, we're going to have to lean into recommendations from the CDC as well as our own state, Louisiana Department of Health for those recommendations.
Okay. Then I have a comment that I think will wrap this up perfectly. Thank you to Louisiana Policy Institute for Children for all you do. This was great information. I could not agree more, and I want to thank Libby and her staff and everybody who joined us today for being so generous with their time and their talents and helping us through a really difficult time. Libby, do you have anything you want to say to close us out?
Again, thank you to our panelists today. We so appreciate your time, and as John said, your talent as well. We just urge you to follow us on Twitter and Facebook, as well as our webpage for the most up-to-date information that we can provide to you all related to the COVID-19 response for early care and education. And thank you all to everybody who joined us. I would be remiss if I did not mention our partners that helped us get this survey out, which was the Agenda for Children in the Greater New Orleans area, as well as the Child Care Assistance, the Child Care Association of Louisiana, all the R&Rs from the Volunteers of America in Baton Rouge, who cover a majority of the state, Northwestern University that has a R&R, the Children's Coalition in Northeast Louisiana, on Track by 5 in Lafayette. We couldn't do this work without partnerships. And we could not do this work without partnerships of chambers of commerce and economic developers and businesses. We are so grateful to you all, and thank you, and let us know if we can do anything to help. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you so much.
Great.
Bye.
All right.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank y'all.
Great. Thanks, Libby.
Thanks.
Thanks, Camille. Thanks, John.
Thank you, Michael.
Thanks, John.